I was holding my third glass of champagne when my mother told 200 people that Ethan got all the family's stability genes and I got the sense of humor, which was her way of saying, in front of caterers and second cousins and a string quartet, that her son was a real adult and her daughter was a punchline with a camera around her neck. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because that's the job, and because if I didn't laugh first, someone might notice the sound underneath it, which was something closer to a crack than a giggle. I lifted my glass to my mother across the tent, like the good sport I have always been contractually obligated to be, and I drank, and I told myself the tightness in my chest was just the champagne, too cold and too fast. The engagement party was at the Whitfield estate, all string lights strangled through the wisteria, and long tables dressed in ivory linen, and it was, objectively, the most beautiful thing I had photographed in over a year, which was its own quiet insult, because none of it was mine. I do this for a living. I document other people's most important nights and then I go home and feed my cat and forget, on purpose, that I have never once been the reason anyone rented a string quartet. Ethan, in his slate blue suit, looked so unbearably happy that I forgave him almost everything, including the stability joke, including the fact that he'd introduced me to 3 separate business associates that night as my sister, the artist, with air quotes I could hear even when he didn't make them with his hands. Daphne was radiant in the particular way brides-to-be are allowed to be radiant, without anyone questioning whether they've earned it, moving through the party like she'd been born knowing which relative to hug and which to merely touch on the forearm. I liked her. I'd liked her from the first dinner, when she asked to see my portfolio and actually looked at it instead of doing the polite scroll people do on unfamiliar phones. She was going to be a good addition to a family that badly needed someone who paid attention. My father had died 6 years earlier, quietly, of a heart that had apparently been failing for longer than anyone realized, and in the aftermath, my mother had reorganized her entire emotional life around control, over the calendar, over the seating charts, over which of her children got which role in the family story. Ethan got competence. I got charm, which is a word people use when they mean unserious. I'd made my peace with it, mostly, the way you make peace with weather, by building a life that didn't ask too much of anyone who couldn't give it. Freelance work, no lease longer than a year. A rotating cast of women I dated with enough enthusiasm to be good company, and not quite enough to risk anything real. It had worked, in the sense that nothing had broken it, for a long time. I noticed the sister before anyone told me who she was. There was a small crisis near the champagne tower. One of the catering staff had stacked the second tier at a slight lean, the kind of lean that promises 100 broken glasses and a ruined dress in the next 90 seconds, and a woman in a dark green dress simply appeared, said something low to the caterer that made him nod fast and grateful, adjusted 2 flutes with 2 fingers, and stepped back before anyone else had registered there'd been a problem at all. She didn't look around for credit. She didn't look around at all. She just melted back toward the edge of the party like she'd never left it, and I thought, courtroom witness. That was the phrase that arrived in my head, unbidden, watching her. Someone who notices everything and testifies to nothing. I lifted my camera out of pure professional reflex and caught her in profile, unposed, the string lights doing something unfair to her jaw, and it was only when I lowered the camera that Ethan appeared at my elbow and said, "That's Celeste, Daphne's sister, older one. Try not to say anything insane to her. She terrifies our Aunt Ruth, and I need Ruth functional for the toast." "I don't say insane things," I said. "You called Grandpa Weiss's second wife the upgrade to her face. That was one time, and it was accurate." He laughed, and for a second he was just my brother and not a man rehearsing for a role he thought I couldn't play, and I loved him uncomplicatedly, the way I had when we were kids and he used to let me win at cards because he could see I needed it more. Then Aunt Ruth called his name, and he was gone, back into the current of the party, and I was alone again with my camera and my champagne, and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who loved me, and had also, without meaning to, decided who I was going to be for the rest of my life. I got a 4th glass. I want to be honest about that because this is a story about honesty eventually, and I don't think it works if I pretend I was more sober than I was. I wasn't dangerously drunk. I was warm and loose and a half step behind my own good judgment. The specific kind of drunk where every unkind thing anyone has ever said about you rises to the surface and asks to be believed. I ended up near the champagne tower myself, later, camera still around my neck, when I misjudged the space behind me, and would have put my elbow through 11 flutes of very expensive Krug if a hand hadn't closed around my wrist and pulled me half a step sideways. "You'd have been billed for that," Celeste said. Up close, her voice was lower than I expected, dry in a way that suggested she found very little of the evening surprising. $60 a bottle, roughly $900 a tower, and Helena would have found a way to make it a referendum on your entire personality. "You know my mother. I've been in her kitchen twice. That was enough." She released my wrist. I felt the absence of it more than I wanted to admit. "You're the photographer." "I'm the sister," I said. "The photography's just the thing I do, so no one asks me to dance." Something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile. "That's an efficient system. I have several." "I believe you." She studied me for a second too long, the way you'd study a contract clause you didn't fully trust. "You should eat something. You're 3 drinks past charming and heading somewhere less useful." Wow, courtroom witness energy, even off the clock. That got an actual reaction. A small exhale through her nose, almost a laugh, quickly filed away. "I don't know what that means." "It means you watch everyone like you're building a case. You fix the champagne tower like it was a crime scene. You've probably already diagnosed everyone's marriage at this party." "Most of them, yes." She said it without apology, which I found unfairly attractive. "It's a professional habit. I do crisis communications. I get paid to notice the thing about to go wrong before it goes wrong. Must be exhausting, never getting to just have a good time." "I have a good time," she said, and there was an edge in it now, thin and real. "I just don't perform it for an audience the way some people do." I should have let that go. I didn't. Some people meaning me. Some people meaning most of the room. But her eyes stayed on me a beat longer than the sentence needed, and I understood, with the particular clarity that 4 glasses of champagne sometimes grants you before it takes everything else away, that she had meant me specifically, and that she'd noticed me noticing my mother's joke, and that she hadn't laughed along with the room the way everyone else had. Before we return to the story, a quick note for my lovely viewers. While this YouTube series keeps things safe, my Patreon is where the real fun happens. That's where you'll find completely uncensored GL stories, much hotter exclusive videos, and bolder adventures that are just too spicy for YouTube. If you want the full, no-limits experience, and to support more of this kind of storytelling, the Patreon link is in the description below. "You did notice," I said, "the joke about Ethan and the stability." Celeste's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I noticed you laughed like it cost you something." I hadn't expected her to say that out loud. Hadn't expected anyone at this party to say anything out loud that wasn't about seating charts or floral budgets, and something in me came loose. "It costs me something every time," I said. "It's fine. It's just, I'm 29, and I photograph other people's happiness for a living, and my own mother stood up in front of 200 people and confirmed that I am the funny disappointment. That's the whole speech. That's my role. I'm very good at it. You're allowed to hate your role." Am I? Because everyone here seems to have gotten a manual for being a functioning adult, and mine got lost in the mail. Ethan has the job, the fiancé, the house with the good gutters. I have a camera, and a rotation of situationships I end before they can end me. I'm not. I stopped, aware I was saying more than the moment had asked for, aware that this stranger in the green dress was looking at me like I was the only interesting thing that had happened all night. "I'm sorry. You didn't sign up for this." "I don't mind honesty," Celeste said. "It's rarer than people think at things like this." "You hide behind competence," I said, testing it, watching to see if it would land or bounce off her the way most things clearly did. It landed. I watched it land. "And you hide behind jokes," she said, quiet now, no edge left in it. "We're not so different. I just do it with better posture." We had drifted, I realized, out of the main light, past the edge of the tent, toward the dark hedge that bordered the Whitfield property, close enough to the party to hear the quartet, but far enough that the two of us were, for the first time, all night, unobserved. The air was cooler out here. I could feel the champagne in my blood, the way you feel weather, present and undeniable, and not entirely under your control. Do you ever feel like everyone assigned themselves a part in this family and forgot to ask you which one you wanted? I said. Every day, Celeste said, and it came out of her like something that had been sitting under a stone for a long time. I'm the reliable one. I fix things. I have been fixing things since I was 14 years old and my mother left, and I have never once been asked what I would do if I simply stopped. Why don't you? Because if I stop, someone I love falls, and I would rather be tired than watch that happen. She looked at me, and there was something unguarded in her face that I don't think she meant to let out into the open air. You asked why I watch everyone. That's why. I'm not building a case. I'm making sure no one I love gets hurt while I'm in the room. I don't fully know what happened in the half second after that. I know that the string lights were doing something soft to the side of her face, and I know that she smelled like cedar and something green, like rain on stone, and I know that every ungenerous thing my family had said about me that night collapsed, all at once, into a single, simple wish to be looked at the way she was looking at me, like I was a whole person instead of a role. So I kissed her. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Her mouth was soft and startled, and then very still, and I felt her hand come up, not to pull me closer, but to rest, carefully, against my collarbone, a boundary disguised as a touch. Rowan, my name, in her voice, low and steady. Look at me. I did. The party noise came rushing back in. The quartet, someone's laugh too loud near the bar. You've had a lot to drink, Celeste said, and you're upset, and you're honest right now in a way I don't think you'd let yourself be sober. I am not going to be the thing you regret in the morning. I don't think I'd regret it. You don't get to know that yet. Her thumb moved once, barely, against my collarbone before she withdrew her hand entirely. If you still want this tomorrow, when you're sober, and you've had food and sleep, and you're not performing survival for 200 relatives, you can tell me. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere before the wedding. That's either the kindest thing anyone's said to me tonight or the most polite rejection I've ever received. The almost smile again. Ask me tomorrow. She walked me back toward the house herself, cutting a path that avoided my mother, found my friend June, who had come as my +1 and general chaos handler, and said something to her quietly enough that I only caught the shape of it, not the words, before June was steering me toward water and a chair and a plate of the good cheese. Celeste didn't stay to watch. She didn't need the credit for that either. I woke the next morning in my childhood bedroom with a headache and a text on my phone from a number I didn't recognize, and I knew before I opened it who it was from. You were upset last night. You were also honest. We will discuss it when you are sober. I read it 4 times. I did not text back right away, because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound either too casual or too much like a confession, and because some part of me, the part that has ended 3 relationships before they could get serious enough to matter, wanted an excuse to let it be a strange, contained thing that happened once, at a party, and never had to be examined again. That plan lasted exactly 9 days, until the post-engagement brunch at my mother's house, where Celeste arrived in pressed linen with a bottle of wine for my mother and a completely unreadable expression for me, and behaved, for 2.5 hours, exactly like a woman who had never once had her collarbone touched by my hand in the dark. She discussed floral logistics with Daphne. She complimented my mother's lemon cake with the specific sincerity of someone who actually meant it. She asked me 1 polite question about my photography business, and received 1 polite answer, and moved on to ask Ethan about his firm's expansion. And I sat there, increasingly furious, watching a woman I had kissed at a party behave like I was a slightly interesting stranger she'd met once at a wedding tasting. I cornered her by the coffee station when my mother went to find more napkins. You're doing the thing, I said. I don't know what thing you mean. The composure thing. You're being so fine about all of it. I am being professional, Celeste said, not unkindly. At a family event, in front of your entire family, 9 days after you kissed me, while you were 3 glasses past your limit. What would you like me to do instead? Announce it over the lemon cake? I'd like you to admit it happened. It happened. She said it simply, without flinching, and something in my chest loosened even as the rest of her sentence tightened it right back up. I remember every second of it. I am not pretending it didn't happen. I am being careful, because I think you deserve care, not because I don't feel anything. Do you feel anything? She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. Wanting something and being ready for it are not the same thing, Rowan, she finally said. I want to be very sure, before either of us does anything that can't be undone, that this isn't a party mistake wearing a more interesting outfit. I remember everything too, I said. I wasn't that drunk. I was drunk enough to say true things I don't usually let myself say out loud. That's different. I know the difference. Something flickered behind her eyes. Want, unmistakably, banked down hard. That's exactly why I'm being careful. I left the coffee station angrier than I'd arrived, and more certain than I had any right to be that I was going to spend the rest of the engagement season proving to this maddening, composed, quietly wrecked woman that I was not a mistake in a more interesting outfit. I did not expect the proving to take months. I did not expect that it would happen across a wedding venue tour on the coast, and a dress fitting with my elbow half through a torn strap, and a game night where Celeste turned out to be a terrifyingly effective Scrabble player, and a poolside barbecue where she wore sunglasses the entire afternoon specifically, I would later learn, so no one could track where she was looking. I did not expect a lakeside cabin, or a charity auction where I watched her command a room of 400 donors, like she'd been built for exactly that purpose, or a hospital corridor at 2 a.m, where all our careful choreography finally came apart. But that's what happened, gathering by gathering, the whole long, unlikely season of it, and I would not trade a single uncomfortable brunch for a version of this where it happened faster. The coastal venue tour came first. The Whitfield family had a second property, an old estate on a bluff above the water, weathered shingle and salt-bleached rose bushes, the kind of place that looked like it had been waiting its whole life to host somebody's wedding. Daphne wanted photographs for the invitation mock-ups, so I was there professionally, camera in hand, and Celeste was there because she was there for everything now, apparently, ever since the brunch, ever since whatever quiet decision she'd made to simply keep showing up. A storm rolled in off the water faster than the forecast had promised. By the time the caterer's assistant and the wedding planner had fled for their cars, Celeste and I were alone in the old boathouse at the bottom of the property, rain coming down in sheets against the single window, both of us soaked from the run down the hill. This is either very romantic or extremely inconvenient, I said, wringing out the hem of my shirt. It can be both. She was toweling her hair with someone's forgotten dish towel, and there was something about seeing her disheveled, hair damp and loose instead of arranged, mascara faintly smudged, laughing, actually laughing, at the absurdity of the two of us stranded in a boathouse that smelled like cedar and old rope. That undid something in me, faster than any composed version of her ever had. You laugh, I said. I didn't know that about you. I laugh plenty, just not usually where your family can catalog it. Why not? She sat down on an overturned crate, considering the question with more weight than it seemed to deserve. Because the first time I let someone see all of me, I got engaged to him, and I spent 2 years slowly disappearing into the version of myself he found easiest to love. Poised, efficient, never inconvenient. By the time I ended it, I'd forgotten what it felt like to laugh somewhere no one was grading it. I sat down beside her, close enough that our knees touched. What happened? I realized he loved the woman I performed at dinner parties. Not the one who cries during dog food commercials, or forgets to eat when she's stressed, or occasionally wants to burn her entire career down and open a bookstore in Vermont. So I left, and I decided it was safer to just be excellent at things instead of being known. That sounds lonely. It is, she said, with the particular honesty of someone who has stopped trying to make loneliness sound like a choice. It's also familiar. Familiar is easier than this. She gestured, faintly, between the two of us. The rain, the whole unlikely wet afternoon. This isn't easy. No, I agreed. It really isn't. We didn't kiss in the boathouse. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been the easy, expected beat, and it isn't what happened. What happened is that we sat there until the storm passed, talking, really talking, about her mother leaving, about my father's slow retreat into work after that same event, about why I photograph everyone else's joy instead of building my own, and when the sun finally broke through the boathouse window in long gold bars across the floor, Celeste reached over without announcing it and laced her fingers through mine, and we sat like that, hand in hand, saying nothing, until someone's flashlight bobbed down the hill looking for us. We let go before the light reached the door. Neither of us said anything about it, but I carried the shape of her hand in mine for days. In between, ordinary life kept happening, the way it does even in the middle of a slow-motion falling. I had a wedding of strangers to shoot the following weekend, a couple named Priya and Marcus who cried through their whole first dance, and I found myself, mid-reception, photographing the groom's mother, watching her son with an expression so nakedly proud it made my throat tight, and I thought about my own mother's toast, the stability joke, and wondered whether she had ever once looked at me like that, or whether I had simply never given her the chance because I'd been too busy preemptively laughing at myself before she could. I texted Celeste a photograph from the reception, not of the couple, but of an abandoned pair of high heels kicked off under a table, gold straps catching the light, and she replied within the hour, saved, and then, a few minutes later, unprompted, how was the wedding? And we spent 40 minutes trading messages about nothing important, about the terrible best man speech, about a client of hers who'd tried to spin a product recall as a marketing opportunity, and it felt, for the length of that conversation, like something closer to normal than anything had felt since the engagement party. The dress fitting happened 2 weeks later, in a boutique with too many mirrors, and a seamstress named Odile, who pinned things with the calm violence of a surgeon. I was there as a bridesmaid, technically, though my role in the wedding remained gently undefined, somewhere between family photographer and family member, which was its own quiet ache I tried not to examine too closely. Celeste was there for Daphne, sitting in the velvet chair by the window scrolling through seating charts, when the strap on my dress tore clean through as I raised my arm to check the fit in the mirror. I caught the fabric before it could slide, holding the whole bodice up with one hand, mortified in front of Odile's very judgmental mirrors. Celeste was across the room before Odile could even look up from her pincushion. "Let me," she said, already reaching for the sewing kit on the fitting table, and I stood very still, arm raised, dress held together with my own fist, while Celeste knelt slightly and worked a needle through torn silk with hands that were, it turned out, extremely steady at close range. "You sew?" I said, mostly to say something, because her knuckles were brushing my ribs with every stitch, and I was doing my best impression of a woman thinking about anything else. "I sew, I do minor plumbing. I can change a tire in under 10 minutes. Reliable daughter training runs deep." She tied off the thread, smoothed the strap flat against my shoulder, and her hand lingered there, just a second, just long enough, before she stepped back. "There. Thank you. You're welcome." Her eyes moved, briefly, helplessly, down, and then quickly back up to my face, and something crackled between us that had nothing to do with torn silk, and Odile, mercifully oblivious, chose that exact moment to announce that the hem needed another half-inch taken up, and the spell broke, and Celeste retreated to her velvet chair, with what I was starting to recognize as her tell, the very slight straightening of her spine that meant she was reasserting control over herself. I started photographing her after that, carefully, at every event, the way I might photograph anything I loved without being ready to say so. A candid at the coastal venue, with wind pulling her hair loose from its knot. Her hands, laughing, at game night, slapping down a Scrabble tile with theatrical triumph after she played quixotic across a triple-word score, and Ethan nearly overturned the board in protest. The specific tilt of her head when she was listening to someone she actually respected. I told myself it was for the wedding album. I knew, developing the film late one night in my studio, that it wasn't. It was the first work I'd made in years that felt like it belonged entirely to me and not to a client, and when I looked at the print of her laughing over the Scrabble board, I understood, with a clarity that had nothing to do with champagne this time, that I was in real trouble. I started sending her photographs that weren't of her. Coffee steam curling gold in morning light. A dog asleep in a shop doorway on 5th. The particular blue of 6 a.m. before the city wakes up. Small, ordinary, unimportant things, sent without commentary. The way you'd hand someone a stone you found on a beach, because it was the exact color of the water that day. She never asked me to stop sending them. She started replying with one word, saved, and I didn't understand, until much later, going through her phone by accident while she charged mine, that she meant it literally. Every photograph I had ever sent her was in a folder titled, with the sort of dry humor I'd grown to recognize as her love language, evidence. The poolside barbecue in July was the first time we got careless, though neither of us would have called it that at the time. It was hot, and the whole extended family had gathered at Ethan and Daphne's rented lake house, and there was a moment, brief, unremarkable to anyone not looking for it, where Celeste's hand found the small of my back as she passed behind my chair to refill her water, a touch so light it could have been an accident, except it lingered a half-second too long, except her thumb moved once against the fabric of my shirt before she kept walking. Daphne saw it. I didn't know that yet. I only knew that I felt it travel up my spine like a struck match, and that across the patio, June, who knew everything by then, because June always knows everything, because I cannot keep a secret from June if my life depends on it, caught my eye and mouthed, subtle, with enough sarcasm to strip paint. That night, at the lakeside cabin the two families had rented for the weekend, I couldn't sleep. I'd been having a bad stretch of it lately, a low-grade anxiety that flared at 2 in the morning and had nothing better to do than replay every version of myself my family had ever assigned me. And I gave up around 1:30, padding downstairs in search of water, and found Celeste sitting alone by the dying fire, still fully dressed, a book open on her knee that she clearly hadn't read a page of in an hour. "Can't sleep either," I said, not really a question. "I don't sleep well in houses full of people I love and can't be honest with," she said. "It's a lifelong condition." I sat down on the rug near the fire, close to her chair, and after a moment she slid down from it to sit beside me instead, shoulder to shoulder, the fire throwing soft orange light across both of us. "I had a panic thing earlier," I admitted. "Not a big one. Just the 2 a.m. kind, where you replay every mean thing anyone's ever said about you like it's a highlight reel." "What's on your highlight reel tonight?" "Mostly my mother's toast, and the fact that I'm 30 in 6 months and I still don't have anything permanent. No house? No," I gestured vaguely at the space between us. "No anything, really, that I've let myself keep." Celeste didn't offer reassurance right away, which I'd learned by then was one of her better qualities. She didn't rush to smooth things over just to end her own discomfort. "I used to think permanence was the goal," she finally said. "Being unshakable. Never needing anyone to catch me. I've been so good at that for so long that I forgot to notice I was also completely alone inside it." She looked at me, firelight moving across her face. "You have more permanent things than you think, Rowan. You just haven't let yourself call any of them permanent yet, including this. Is this permanent?" "I don't know," she said, honestly. "I know I think about you constantly, which is new, and inconvenient, and completely unlike me. I know I have a folder in my phone. I would be mortified for anyone to find. I know I have not felt this unguarded around another person since before my mother left, and it terrifies me, and I keep showing up anyway." She exhaled, something in her posture finally, fully unwinding. "I think that might be what permanent feels like, actually. Terrifying and unavoidable." I didn't kiss her that night either. We fell asleep on the rug in front of the dying fire, an arm's length apart, and woke at dawn to Ethan's voice calling something from the kitchen, and scrambled apart with the guilty efficiency of teenagers, and I don't think either of us has ever laughed harder, afterward, at how thoroughly undignified the whole thing was. The game night in August deserves its own mention, if only because it was the first time I saw the two families genuinely merge into something like one unit, instead of two polite factions circling each other. It was hosted at Helena's, ostensibly casual, though Helena's version of casual still involved a signature cocktail and place cards for a card table. Teams were drawn at random from a hat, which meant I ended up partnered with Celeste against Ethan and Daphne for Scrabble, and I discovered, over the course of 90 increasingly competitive minutes, that Celeste treated a board game with the exact same lethal precision she brought to a hedge fund negotiation. She played quixotic across a triple-word score, with the calm satisfaction of a woman closing a merger, and when Ethan accused her of hoarding all the good letters through sheer force of will, she said without looking up, "I don't hoard, I calculate," and the whole table dissolved into laughter, even Ethan's, even mine, and for one unguarded hour, nobody at that table was performing anything. I caught her afterward in the kitchen, refilling water glasses, and said, "You're terrifyingly good at that," and she said, "I'm terrifyingly good at most things I decide matter," and let the sentence sit there long enough that I understood exactly what she meant by it, and didn't say anything at all, because some silences are better left unbroken. The charity auction was in September, black tie, both families seated at adjoining tables for a cause Helena had adopted with the fervor she usually reserved for seating charts. I watched Celeste work the room in a way I hadn't seen before, commanding, precise, closing a $100,000 pledge from a hedge fund manager with 3 sentences and a look that could have frozen the wine in his glass. And I understood, watching her, why her family assumed she was made of something colder than the rest of them. She wasn't cold. She was armored, and the armor was extraordinary to watch. And also, quietly, it broke my heart a little, because I knew now what was underneath it. She found me afterward on the terrace, where I'd escaped for air and a break from photographing 400 strangers' best behavior. "You were terrifying in there," I said. "Was I?" "In the best way. I've never seen anyone dismantle a hedge fund manager's ego so politely. It's a skill." She leaned against the railing beside me, city lights spread out below the terrace, and for once, she didn't reach for composure right away. "I liked that you were watching." "I'm always watching. It's my whole personality, apparently." "It's not your whole personality." She turned to face me fully. "You catalog people the way I do, you know? You just do it with a camera instead of a legal pad. I've seen the way you photograph this family. You see all of us more clearly than we see ourselves. I think that's why it hurts you so much when they get you wrong. You'd never get any of them wrong." It was, without question, one of the kindest things anyone had ever said to me, and I felt it land somewhere under my sternum, warm and unfamiliar, and I understood that this, the boathouse, the fitting room, the fireside 2 a.m. conversation, this terrace, this had stopped being about a drunken kiss at an engagement party a long time ago. October brought the hospital. Elena had a fall on the stairs at her house, nothing life-threatening, a bad break in her wrist and a concussion that kept her overnight for observation, but frightening in the way any parent's sudden fragility is frightening, and the whole family converged on the hospital waiting room in various states of disarray. Ethan was pale and useless with fear, pacing. Daphne was on the phone rescheduling the venue tour they'd had planned for the next morning, and I was the one, somehow, who ended up in the room with my mother, holding her uninjured hand, keeping her calm, making her laugh weakly about the truly unflattering hospital gown, while a doctor explained the concussion protocol in a voice too clinical for a woman who was, underneath the bravado, badly frightened. Celeste found me in the hallway afterward, once my mother had drifted off to sleep, and I finally let the fear I'd been holding all night crack open, and she didn't say anything wise or composed. She just pulled me into the family lounge, out of the hallway's fluorescent glare, and held me while I cried into her shoulder, her hand steady on the back of my head, and when I finally pulled back, wrecked and grateful, she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Undone, entirely, no armor left in it at all. "You were extraordinary tonight," she said. "With your mother. I watched you and I thought, everyone in this family has spent years deciding you're not dependable, and none of them have ever once watched you the way I've watched you tonight. I'm not usually like that. I usually panic and let someone else handle it. You didn't tonight." Her hand found mine. "I don't want to hide this anymore, Rowan. I'm tired of being careful. I've been careful my whole life, and it's never once made me happy." Ethan chose that exact moment to walk into the family lounge looking for coffee, and stopped dead in the doorway at the sight of our joined hands, and something in his face rearranged itself in real time. Confusion, then a slow, dawning, furious understanding. "You too," he said. "How long has this been happening?" "Ethan." Celeste's voice was steady, but she didn't let go of my hand. This isn't the place. You've been at every single event for 6 months. I actually thought you were being kind to Rowan because Daphne asked you to. I didn't think, he dragged a hand down his face. Mom's in the next room with a concussion, Celeste. I know exactly where our mother is, Celeste said, and there was an edge in her voice now that I'd never heard directed at anyone but hedge fund managers. I have been in that room holding her hand for 3 hours. Don't you dare imply I don't understand the stakes of tonight. I'm not implying anything about you. I'm asking my sister why she didn't tell me she's been sneaking around with Daphne's sister for half a year while we're planning a wedding. Sneaking around, I repeated, and something in me, exhausted and raw, and finally out of patience, came loose. Is that what you think this is? A stunt? You know what, Ethan? I have spent my entire life being the person you all expect to embarrass you eventually. The reckless one. The one who can't be trusted with anything real. So, when something real actually happened to me, yes, I was careful about how I told you, because I already knew exactly what your face would look like right now. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You've never once asked me if I was happy. You ask if I'm being careful. You ask if I'm going to embarrass Mom. You never ask if I'm happy, because you're always too busy waiting for me to fail, so you can be right about me. My voice cracked and I let it, for once, instead of turning it into a joke. Well, I'm not failing. I'm in love with your fiancé's sister, and it's the best thing that has happened to me in years, and I am done apologizing for it just because it's inconvenient timing for your wedding. Ethan flinched like I'd hit him. For a moment, nobody said anything, the hospital hallway humming fluorescent and indifferent around us. She's going to get tired of you, he said finally, low, and I could hear that he regretted it even as it left his mouth. Could hear that it was fear talking, and not truth. But it landed anyway, a direct hit. Celeste fixes things, Rowan. She's spent her whole life cleaning up other people's messes. How long before she realizes you're just one more mess to manage? The silence after that was its own kind of injury. I saw it land on Celeste's face too. Saw something old and frightened flicker there. Some version of the fear she'd confessed to me in the boathouse, that she would only ever be loved for what she could fix. That's enough, Celeste said quietly, and walked out of the lounge without another word. And I didn't know, in that moment, whether she was walking away from Ethan or from me. I threw myself into work that stretch, the way I always do when I don't want to feel something directly. I booked 3 weddings in 2 weeks, edited photographs until 2 in the morning, let June drag me out for overpriced cocktails I barely tasted. None of it filled the specific shape of the absence. I kept catching myself glancing toward doorways at family gatherings, some old reflex expecting her to be leaning against the frame with that unreadable, watchful expression, and every time she wasn't there it felt like a small, fresh surprise, which was its own kind of exhausting, grief that refuses to become familiar, that insists on announcing itself new each time. She pulled back after that. Not dramatically, she still came to the family dinners, still helped with wedding logistics, still sat 2 seats away from me at Thanksgiving, with impeccable posture, but the hand at the small of my back disappeared. The texts slowed to logistics only. When I sent her a photograph of frost on my studio window, she didn't reply saved. She didn't reply at all. She thinks stepping back protects Daphne's wedding, June told me, because June had, infuriatingly, become close enough with Celeste's assistant to have opinions about this. She thinks if the 2 of you cool off until after the ceremony, nobody blames you for wrecking it. I don't want to be protected out of my own relationship. Then tell her that, loudly, with your actual voice, for once, instead of a camera lens between you and everyone you love. I noticed her absence everywhere after that. At the final table read for toasts, her place card sat with an empty chair beside it. She'd sent apologies, a work conflict, plausible and probably even partly true. At the last dress fitting, Odile, without thinking, asked where the tall one had gotten to, the one who always fixed things, and nobody had an answer. My coffee, made wrong 3 mornings running by a barista who had learned her order from watching us together for months, went uncorrected because there was no one standing beside me anymore to quietly switch it before I noticed. I sent 1 more photograph, my own reflection, tired, Unfiltered, no caption. And she didn't answer that one either. And something in me finally understood what I had refused to understand all season. It wasn't the secrecy that had made this exciting. The secrecy was the part I hated most. What I wanted, underneath all of it, was simply to be chosen out loud. The venue flooded 4 days before the wedding. A freak November storm dropped 6 inches of rain in 18 hours, and the Whitfield Estates' lower gardens, where the ceremony was supposed to happen, went under standing water, and the tent company called at 6 in the morning to say the marquee had partially collapsed under the weight of it. Daphne, when I got to the house, was sitting on the kitchen floor, having the kind of silent, shaking panic attack that doesn't announce itself with noise, just stillness and white knuckles and a stare fixed on nothing, and Helena, wrist still healing, was trying to manage 3 vendor phone calls at once and failing, and Ethan was standing in the doorway looking like a man watching his whole plan for adulthood wash away with the garden. I don't fully know what took over me. I knelt down next to Daphne first, because someone needed to, and I did the thing I do at every chaotic event I've ever photographed. I got quiet and steady, and I told her to breathe with me, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, until her hands stopped shaking. Then I took Helena's phone out of her good hand and started making calls myself. The indoor reception venue 2 towns over that I'd photographed a wedding at last spring, the tent company, a florist I knew who owed me a favor, while Ethan finally started actually listening to what I was telling him, instead of what he assumed I'd say. Celeste arrived 40 minutes later, soaked from the walk from her car, and found the kitchen transformed. Daphne breathing normally again, Helena on hold with the insurance company instead of hyperventilating, me on my 3rd call rebooking the entire ceremony indoors, and she stood in the doorway for a second, just watching, and something in her face rearranged itself the way Ethan's had in the hospital hallway, except this time it wasn't horror. It was something closer to awe. "You did all this?" she said, when I finally hung up. "It's just event logistics. It's basically the same job as photography, just with more yelling." I was too wired on adrenaline to fully register what was happening, but I registered this: Ethan, across the kitchen, watching me with an expression I had never once seen him wear in my presence. Not pity, not exasperation, something like respect. "Rowan handled all of it," he said quietly. To Celeste, to the room, to himself. I just stood here. "You were about to marry into a family emergency, without a functioning nervous system," I said. "It's fine. Somebody had to be the reliable one for a change." Something about the word landed on Celeste like a struck bell. She crossed the kitchen and took my hand right there, in front of Ethan, in front of Helena still on the phone, in front of Daphne watching from the floor with an expression that was slowly clearing from panic into something more like understanding. "I have spent this entire season being careful," Celeste said, low enough that it was almost just for me, "and I have never once regretted anything as much as I regret the last 6 weeks. You don't have to say this here. I want to say it here." Her thumb moved over my knuckles. "I am done deciding what's best for you without asking you. I'm sorry." Daphne from the floor said, in a voice still a little unsteady from the panic attack, but clear enough to carry, "Could you two maybe do this after we solve the flood?" Which was, in its way, its own kind of blessing. Nobody in that kitchen looked surprised. Nobody demanded an explanation. The flood needed solving, and so we solved it, together, all 5 of us. And it wasn't until that evening, both families finally gone home to dry clothes and forwarding numbers for the relocated venue, that Celeste and I found ourselves alone in Helena's back garden, standing in the last of the storm's gray light. "I need to say the rest of it properly," Celeste said. "Not in a kitchen during a crisis." "Okay." I pulled away because I was frightened, and I told myself it was protection, and it wasn't. It was fear wearing a responsible coat, which is a costume I have used my entire life. I am tired of being the reliable daughter who disappears the second something becomes inconvenient for someone else. I want to be inconvenient. I want to be visible. I want to walk into the rehearsal dinner with your hand in mine, and not care who has an opinion about the timing. I turn pain into impulsive action, I said, because it felt important in that moment to give her the honest half of this too. That's my costume. I photograph things instead of keeping them, I date casually instead of risking real loss. And when I got scared this season, some part of me almost sabotaged this on purpose, just to prove I was right to expect it to end. I don't want to do that anymore either. Then don't. You don't have to sacrifice your relationship with Daphne for me. I mean that. If we do this, we do it in a way that doesn't cost you your sister. I know. Celeste stepped closer. Rain-damp hair, the porch light doing something soft and gold to her face, and this time when she reached for me, there was nothing careful in it at all. I talked to Daphne, actually. Weeks ago, before all of this. You did? She asked me if you made me happy. Celeste's mouth curved, the almost smile finally allowed to become a real one. I told her that you are the first person who has ever looked at me without immediately asking me to fix something. That you let me be tired and unguarded, and occasionally ridiculous over a Scrabble board, and you never once treated my competence like it was the only interesting thing about me. Her hand came up to my face. I told her I was in love with you. She told me it was about time I noticed. The kiss, when it finally came, was nothing like the one at the engagement party. That one had been startled and desperate and edged with champagne and grief. This one was slow, deliberate, both of us entirely present for it, her hand steady against my jaw, mine finding the curve of her waist, rain finally easing to a soft patter against the porch roof above us. I felt her breath catch. Actually catch. No cliché intended. Just the very real sound of restraint finally letting go. And when we broke apart, foreheads together, she laughed, low and unguarded, a sound I had spent 5 months slowly earning the right to hear. I intend to kiss you sober from now on, she said, for the record.
Good.
I hear the other version has a reputation. We went inside, eventually, out of the last of the rain, and what happened after that, I'll keep mostly to myself. The low lamplight in my mother's guest room, the careful, unhurried undoing of buttons, her hands finally allowed to be as unguarded as the rest of her, my own hands memorizing what 5 months of restraint had only let me imagine. I will say that it was tender before it was anything else, that we laughed twice in the middle of it at nothing in particular, the specific giddy laughter of two people who have crossed a very long distance to arrive somewhere safe, and that I woke the next morning with her arm heavy across my waist, and understood, with a clarity I had never once felt with anyone before her, that I did not want to photograph this. I wanted to keep it. The rehearsal dinner, 3 nights later, was held in the relocated venue's private dining room. Warm light and rebuilt centerpieces, and a room full of relatives who had spent the last 2 weeks recalibrating their opinions of me in real time. Helena, wrist in a cast, cornered me near the bar before the toasts. I heard about you and Celeste, she said, in the particular tone she reserved for topics she hadn't fully made peace with. I just think, perhaps, until after the wedding, it might be easier if the two of you were a little more discreet. For Daphne's sake, we don't want any distractions. I felt the old reflex rise in me, the urge to laugh it off, shrink it down, make myself smaller and more palatable so the room could relax. I didn't do it. I'm not going to be discreet about this, Mom, I said, steady, quiet enough not to make a scene, but clear enough that she couldn't pretend she'd misheard. I spent my whole life being the thing this family managed, instead of the thing this family celebrated. I'm not doing that with Celeste. I love her. I'm not hiding that to make anyone's toast go smoother. Celeste appeared at my side then, not to speak for me. She'd promised me that, and she kept it. Just to stand beside me, hand finding mine, present and unhidden, while I finished saying what I needed to say. You don't have to understand it tonight, I told my mother, but I'd like you to at least stop asking me to shrink. Helena looked between the two of us for a long moment, something working behind her eyes, surprise maybe, at the steadiness in my voice, a steadiness she'd apparently never expected from the daughter she'd spent 30 years cataloging as the unreliable one. You've changed, she finally said, not unkindly. I've always been like this, I said. Nobody was looking. Ethan found me afterward, near the dessert table, and didn't bother with a preamble. I owe you an apology. A real one, not the kind I usually give where I explain why I wasn't actually wrong. I'm listening. What I said in the hospital, that Celeste would get tired of you, that you were a mess to manage. That wasn't about Celeste at all. It was about the version of you I've been carrying around since we were kids, the one who needed rescuing. I never updated it. Even after tonight in the kitchen, even after watching you basically save my wedding from a flood, some part of me was still waiting for you to become that person again. He shook his head. You're not her. I don't know when you stopped being her, or if you ever really were her, but I've been unfair to you for a long time, and I'm sorry. Thank you, I said, and meant it, and hugged him, and felt something old and tired finally set down between us. Daphne, across the room, caught my eye and lifted her glass a half-inch in my direction. Not a public gesture, just a private one, sister to sister, an acknowledgement that didn't need an audience to be real. The wedding, 2 days later, was everything Daphne deserved. The relocated venue draped in white and gold, afternoon light through tall windows, Ethan crying openly during his vows, in a way that undid my mother completely. I photographed all of it, professionally, the job I do better than almost anything else. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible behind the lens. I felt like exactly where I was supposed to be, at the edge of the aisle, capturing the exact second Ethan's face broke open with joy, catching Celeste in her seat 2 rows back watching the ceremony, with an expression of unguarded warmth she would once have died before letting anyone photograph. After the ceremony, before the receiving line scattered into the reception, Daphne pulled 1 white peony from her bouquet and pressed it into my hand. For you, she said, you held this family together when it mattered. I wanted you to have a piece of it. I didn't cry, which felt like a minor miracle given the day, but it was close. At the reception, once the formal dances had finished and the room had loosened into music and champagne and the easy chaos of a party, finally allowed to just be a party, Celeste found me by the terrace doors and held out her hand. Dance with me, properly, where everyone can see. Everyone's already seen. Helena gave a whole speech about resilience at cocktail hour that was very obviously about us. Then let them see the rest of it. She pulled me onto the floor, one hand at my waist, the other laced through mine, and we moved slow and unhurried, while the band played something old and warm, and I thought about the woman at the champagne tower 6 months earlier, watching everyone like she was building a case, and the woman in front of me now, entirely unguarded, entirely mine. You know, she said against my ear, this all started because you got drunk and kissed me at your brother's engagement party. I remember you called it a party mistake wearing a more interesting outfit. I was wrong. Her hand tightened at my waist. I've been wrong about a lot of things this year. I'm glad you didn't let me stay wrong. For the record, I said, I intend to keep kissing you. Drunk, sober, mid-crisis, over Scrabble boards. Whichever version's available. I'll hold you to that. Several months later, on a lazy Sunday in March, the whole family gathered at Ethan and Daphne's house for what had become, without anyone officially declaring it, a standing tradition. A big, noisy lunch, too much food, Helena narrating everyone's lives whether they wanted narration or not, June inevitably showing up an hour late with wine and gossip. I arrived with Celeste, who let herself in the side door without knocking anymore, who had 3 shirts and a spare toothbrush at my apartment now, who kept a folder on her phone still titled Evidence, now 300 photographs deep, and who crossed the kitchen straight to me, put a hand at my waist in front of everyone, and kissed me, unhurried, unhidden, entirely ordinary, before saying hello to anyone else in the room. Nobody looked up. That was the part that undid me, standing in Daphne's kitchen with flour on my hands from helping with the bread. Nobody looked up, because it wasn't news anymore, because we had become, somewhere in the last several months, simply a fact of the family the way Ethan's terrible taste in ties was a fact, or Helena's insistence on seating charts for a casual lunch was a fact. We disagreed sometimes, about whose turn it was to host, about Celeste's habit of working through dinner, about my habit of leaving cameras in inconvenient places, and neither of us threatened to leave over any of it, because it turned out that was the whole difference between a party mistake and a real thing. A real thing survives being ordinary. Later, after lunch, Helena rounded everyone up for the family photograph she insisted on every visit now, an entire wall of them accumulating in her hallway. She set up the tripod, fumbled with the timer the way she always did, and called for everyone to gather. Ethan and Daphne in the middle, Helena beside them, June photobombing from the edge as always. "Rowan, get in the frame," Helena called. "You're always the one hiding behind the camera." For the first time in my life, I didn't argue. I set the timer myself, walked into the frame, and found Celeste already there, arm open, waiting for me the way she'd been waiting, patiently, and then not so patiently, for the better part of a year. I stepped into the space beside her, and she reached for my hand just as the shutter clicked. And somewhere in that photograph, which now hangs in Helena's hallway between Ethan and Daphne's wedding portrait, and a picture of Grandpa Weiss looking unimpressed at a barbecue, is the exact second I understood that the story was never really about Celeste showing up at every family event. It was that she kept choosing to stay after the event was over,